Howdy ho. Time for the weekly podcast. This is Aaron Purdue, aka AL-BINO. So this one's going to be a little bit different. Stepping away from the cultural for a little bit because although this is something that I kind of understood or felt or knew, but just didn't articulate, or it wasn't at the top of my mind. Heard a podcast earlier today that really just kind of turned on some light bulbs for me. And hat tip to Michael Bordanello, who's a real estate podcaster. Does a lot of real estate shows and stuff like that. So hat tip to him, credit to him, fair use. But I watched a podcast with him on it today. He was walking around, doing his real estate talks and stuff like that. But a topic that he mentioned today was something about the fact that we've been, according to some economists and according to some people who actually really crunch the numbers, we've been in a depression or possibly we've been in a recession or possibly a depression since 2020. Actually, the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. So almost 4 years now, right? And actually probably since the Mexican beer virus. Anyways, brought up some very good points. Whereas inflation is running rampantly high, it has been since 2021, and actually since the Mexican beer sickness. That GDP growth has been at a lower rate than actual inflation. And he said, by any true economic standard, where inflation outpaces GDP growth, meaning the cost of money, or not the cost of money, but the cost of goods and services outpaces the actual expansion of the economy. Not only is that just inflation, but that's actually a form of recession or depression, because when you actually run the numbers, say for example we have GDP growth of 1.4%, but inflation is running 3%. When you factor that out, your actual GDP growth is negative 1.6%. So if that is true, then for the entire Joe Biden presidency, we have been in an inflationary recession. And some real, actual economists would probably say that since this has been going on for as long as it has been, and since at one point reported, I use that word carefully, inflation was at 9%, and GDP growth was being reported somewhere between 3 and 4%, then, the actual negative growth of the economy based upon that math would be closer to negative, somewhere between -4 and 6%. That actually fits the definition in some spaces where we were actually in a depression. Here's the thing, too, that was also brought up, not just by Michael himself, but by other podcasters. But hat tip again, Michael, for bringing this up today, or whenever you did that podcast. I watched it today. I'll have to go back and check the date on it. I think it was today. It was fairly recent. One of the things that he brought up is a lot of the GDP growth that is being reported is actually government expansion, or expansion in government spending. And a lot of the new employment that's being reported is government jobs. And a lot of the rest of the new employment that's being reported is part-time jobs. So a lot of people have 2 part-time jobs to try to make a full-time income. Well, according to what they call the U3 numbers, or the official unemployment numbers, that's counted as being employed. Okay, if you look at the U6 numbers, which is the underemployed numbers, stuff like that, our unemployment numbers would probably be much greater. Donald Trump in his 2016 election campaign estimated that the true unemployment rate at the time of his 2016 campaign was probably around 20%. And he kept talking about the actual unemployment numbers, not the official unemployment numbers, because at that time, unemployment was officially, during the Obama administration, hovering around 4 to 5%. But he kept saying, oh, well, unemployment's probably closer to 15% or 20% actual unemployment. What did he mean by that? He was referencing U6 and people that were underemployed and the long-term unemployed. Here's how that works. Since the Clinton administration, I believe it was the Clinton administration, they only count you as unemployed if you've been unemployed for less than 12 months and are still looking for work. Once you exceed that 12-month mark, or for some reason you're not still looking for work, so say for example, you just take a string of gig jobs, driving for Uber, going on Craigslist and looking for day jobs, day labor jobs that pay $100 to $200 a day every day. Getting up in the morning to do that. Doing odd jobs as your full-time work. You're still, you could call yourself an entrepreneur, but unless that's your actual business, you're still technically unemployed. Versus, say, for example, back in the 1980s and the early 1990s, when you were counted as unemployed, you were actually out of a regular job. So, say, for example, your business, say you had a brick and mortar business, and it went under. Okay, now you're unemployed. You worked for a brick and mortar business. Or in today's economy, you had a job that you signed into remotely every day with a company or a business, and it was a regular full-time, minimum 40 hours a week type gainful employment, no matter if you get in your car and go somewhere or you do it from home, but it's steady employment. So your gig business may not be steady employment, right? Because what if you get on Craigslist today or Facebook Marketplace and there's no daytime or day labor gig work for you today? Well, and this week you only worked 20 hours. All right, well, okay. You're still either underemployed or unemployed. So I'm surprised Mr. Trump hasn't started talking about this yet. He might eventually. He's kind of weird that way. He's still fighting a lot of political battles with the establishment. We'll call him the deep state. But if employment becomes an issue, I will bet you money he will go back and say that unemployment is probably over 10% again. The actual unemployment rate. Okay. So, GDP growth rate smaller than the rate of inflation. So, we may have made 1.4% more widgets this year than we did last. Let's use that number, right? But the actual growth of money is more than, or the actual value of money or goods and services has fallen faster than the rate of GDP growth, which means, by definition, at the very least, we are in an inflationary recession. What does that mean? So business X puts out 1.4 times, or 1.4% more, 1.4% more widgets this year than they did last year. However, the cost of business is 3% more than it was last year. So therefore, they take a loss. Or they have to downsize their operation, including downsizing the number of people that work for them, possibly 1.6%, to meet that, to realize, or just to break even on that 1.4% growth. Does that make sense? If we were to start looking at actual numbers, so say, for example, not the CPI, because we know that the CPI can be altered, right? And we know this because we've had people tell us this. So let's say, for the example, the basket of goods that they use to compute the CPI, right? Let's say that basket of goods at one point in time included ribeye steak, right? So the price of ribeye steak goes up by 15%. So instead of reporting the price increase of ribeye steak, what they'll do is say, okay, well, we're going to record the price of beef, and then they'll go down to 80% lean ground beef. And that price may have gone up 15% as well, but it's only up 3% or less than 3% of the increase of the price of ribeye steak. See how they fudge the numbers? So, the economic pain you feel is very real. If you're losing your job, it's real. If you're making the same wages as you did last year, but it's buying you less stuff at the same amount of work time, you are experiencing a recession. It's called an inflationary recession. The Fed keeps saying that inflation should be running about 2%. Okay, that's a target number. Where'd they get that number? From thin air. Yes, a little bit of inflation is actually a good thing. 1%, 2% tops. Tops. But you really want inflation less than 2%. 1.5%, 0.8%, something like that. And here's why. not just because of consumer costs, but also business costs. Oh yes, the makers of widgets are also customers too, because they have to buy the raw materials to make the widgets. The producers of the raw materials are also customers too. Why? Because they have to buy the tools to either mine or farm or harvest the raw materials that the manufacturers need to make the widgets. So everybody's a customer, right? So we'll use the CPI number, even though we all know it's bullshit, right? If consumer prices go up by 3% for an end user, let's say that it's mom at the grocery store buying Pop-Tarts for her children, guess what? The bakery that made the Pop-Tarts had to pay 3% more this year on average, according to the official inflation numbers, for the wheat and the fruit and the paraffin and the sugar to make the Pop-Tarts. 3% more for the foil wrapping, for the cardboard, for the box, all that. So they're customers too, right? So if they're having a production increase of or an income or production increase or both of 1.4%, but they have to pay 3% more for the goods that they need to make the widget for you, or to go get the widget. So, the guy who cuts the timber to send to the sawmill to be processed to go to Home Depot so that way you can buy a 2x4. If he has to replace a chainsaw or buy gasoline for his chainsaw, he's paying X% more, even though he's cutting down 1.4% more trees. He's in a recession, okay? Because even though he made 1.4% more money and cut down 1.4% more trees than he did last year, his overhead costs are 3% more, according to the official numbers. He's taking a loss. That, by definition, is a recession. Thank you, Joe Biden, for a 4-year recession. Thank you, Joe Biden, for if you really look at the actual numbers, especially in 2022, when your administration was reporting 9% inflation, and it was probably closer to 18 or 20% inflation, causing a gap of what? Greater than 5% in loss? That by definition is a depression. We are now living through a Joe Biden recession. We are now living through a Joe Biden inflationary recession / depression. Period. End of story. Well, the market's holding up. The market is overvalued. Okay? It really is. I don't know of very many people who can afford to buy stocks at the prices they're at today. A few, but not many. Who's buying into the market? Anybody? Anybody? The Fed and the Treasury. So the bailouts did not stop with Chrysler, General Motors, and AIG. Just don't know about it. That's why market value on the stock markets is so much greater than the pace of street business. General Motors. Go to your local Chevy dealer. I'm doing this in July of 2024. That's towards the end of the 2024 model year. Model year starts September, right? Go to your Chevrolet dealer. See how many brand new, never been driven before off the lot other than a test drive, brand new 2022 Chevrolets are still on the lot. Folks, there's still a lot of 2023 brand new, not used, brand new, not program cars, brand new year model cars sitting on dealer lots today. All makes. There's 2022s. In a recessionary economy, that rarely happens. They happen once in a while. In an inflationary economy, maybe. If that economy is still growing at the rate of inflation or greater by GDP, right? In a healthy economy, that never happens, ever. You know when that happens? That happens in 1930 when Chevrolet and Ford are still trying to get 1929 Chevrolets and Fords off the lot. That happens in 1931 when Chevrolet and Ford are still trying to get 1929 Chevrolets and Fords off the lot. It's happening now. It's happening right now. Travis over at Real Estate Mindset just put out another shocking report yesterday. And the research he's doing says that 1.3 million houses in the United States that were purchased in the last 3 years are at risk of foreclosure. 4.3 million homeowners that bought their houses within the last 4 years are delinquent. Let's see, what was the U.S. Census data? There were 310 million people in the United States in 2010. I think that was the number. I'll have to look that up, but I'm fairly confident on that. 2020 put us over 330 million people. So there's roughly 20 million more people living in this country today. And the numbers for foreclosure and risk of foreclosure and delinquency are almost, I think he said, no, I don't think he said, I think by my estimation, they're almost twice as high as they were in 2008. The only thing that's kind of keeping that at bay right now is the fact that they have, oh crap, it starts with an E. Can't remember it. I'm really tired because I had a long day yesterday. But they've got these programs in right now where it's harder to evict people. And it doesn't start with an E, or it starts with an F. Forbearance, because of forbearance rules. Okay, and actually, a lot of people are still in forbearance from COVID. So, if that's part of those numbers, or if that's in addition to those numbers, I don't know. But we are possibly looking at a 1930s style economy. It's just that the powers that be right now are getting very good at covering it up. How's your standard of living? How's your money flow, your cash flow? How's your security now versus 4.5 years ago before COVID? How is that? Let me ask you this. Here's something to think about. Actually, no. I don't want to ask that question yet. I want to use another analogy. Everybody that does not like Trump doesn't like him because he's either, in their minds, a racist, an extremist, or an asshole, right? Well, okay. If I go to court with somebody and I want to win my court battle, I want my lawyer to be very good at what he does. I want my lawyer to be a very intelligent and smart man. But you know what else I want my lawyer to be? I want my lawyer to be a fucking asshole. To be that asshole. Because I want to win. So, Trump's an asshole. Great, wonderful. I like assholes in my corner. They help me win. Okay? I hope he's a fucking asshole. I hope he's an even bigger asshole this time around. How about that? And he's a relatively successful businessman too. So that means he's a good lawyer and he's an asshole. Excellent. I win my case. He's a racist. Well, he's not, and he's proven he's not, time and again, over Joe Biden, who is on record as being a racist. But for today's discussion, okay, I'll give you, he might have racist tendencies. Just for today's discussion, we'll do that. We'll say that, okay? Let me ask you this. Now I'm going to ask the question. If a potential asshole racist makes it to where everybody, regardless of their race, can live better and do better and be more comfortable, even if he's a racist, but just by the policies that he puts in place and the things that he does, it makes it better for everybody. Is it better than the person who, in your argument, even though everybody knows he's a racist and we've proven it, in your argument, the guy who's supposedly not a racist makes it worse for everybody? Which one would you rather go with? The guy that you don't like, but allows your life to be better in spite of that? Or the guy that you like, who's systematically destroying everything to where you can't have a life or it's more difficult for you to have a life. Which guy would you really vote for? Brass tacks. For real. Let's pretend, for this discussion, that Donald John Trump is the grand cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. And he hates Mexicans, which he doesn't. He hates blacks. He hates Jews. He hates everybody who isn't red-haired and fucking lily white. But the policies he puts in place are policies which help everybody, including the people that he hates, to do better and to live better. And it makes it easier for them. Now, he's not a racist like Hitler where he goes around. He just doesn't like you, right? Let's pretend that's the truth. All right? But what he does makes it easier for you and your family, regardless of the fact that you think that he doesn't like you. But we're pretending that he doesn't, right? We're pretending that he goes off in the woods somewhere in secret and burns crosses, right? But the things that he does makes it better for you. But the guy who says he's your friend makes it almost impossible for you, his so-called friend, to get a leg up, to get better. Where does your feelings stop and your self-interest and your instincts for survival kick in? When are you going to stop believing the lies? Or are you just going to be a bunch of lemmings? Oh, the lemming that looks like me, or the lemming that says that he's my friend just jumped off of a cliff, so I'm going to go with him because he's for the lemmings. What the fuck? We all know that every single dog on this planet is descended from a wolf, right? And we know that wolves are dangerous to sheep. But explain a border collie. Or what's another dog that came up, or another breed of dog that was originally used to herd animals? Oh, German Shepherd. German Shepherds kind of look like wolves, right? Well, they got the name, or the word shepherd in their name. So that means they were probably used to herd sheep, right? Now, if a border collie or German Shepherd were not trained to herd sheep, they would, and if they were one-on-one with the sheep, and they weren't trained as herding animals, they might try to eat that sheep. But if they're trained as herding animals, they'll protect that sheep, right? They'll move those sheep around. They'll bring those sheep back into the barn if they're trained to do the right thing. So let's pretend that Donald Trump was born into a family of racists. That one might be believable because there's some stuff about his dad kind of being a little shifty with some of the stuff back in the day. Okay, so he was born into a family of racists. Let's use that discussion. But as he grew into manhood and started doing business, he was like that border collie, right? Or that German Shepherd or that sheepdog. And he was trained not to eat the fucking sheep, but to actually work to protect the sheep. See, I was born into a family of racists. I'm from a southern white family. Not everybody in my lineage were racist. My grandfather grew up as a poor half Native American half white, sharecropper in Oklahoma. He was born in a shack in eastern Oklahoma. But his family is a Southern family. So I have racists in my lineage. Sure as I'm sitting here talking to you on this phone, right? Some of my aunts and uncles have certain attitudes about things. Some of my even closer relatives have certain attitudes about things. But does that make me a racist as an individual? Or is it possible that I look at those people and be like, oh, you're an idiot, I'm going to go over here? Is it possible that I look at those people and say, well, no, that's pretty fucking stupid. This guy's a good guy and I work with him and he does a better job than I. Or as good of a job as I do, or whatever, right? So, here's something interesting that we're told about the time of chattel slavery, right? And this was an observation that was made, and then this was later backed up by actual psychological research. So back in the day during chattel slavery, in the American South, and in parts of the northern states where slavery was legal and people still had slaves, the children of the master and the slave children, unless they were forced to be separated, often would play together. And often did not know that Billy was black and Jimmy was white. They just didn't know that until they were told. Now we have psychological research that actually tells us that unless you tell a young person, a child, that there's brown people, black people, there's different races of white people, like Jewish people, but not all Jewish people are white. Some are brown, some are even black, right? But unless you tell a child and point out those differences to that child theoretically could grow up into adulthood and never even know the difference. So, in its purest sense, a white person is not born a racist. A black person is not born a racist. A Native American person is not born a racist. A Jewish person is not born a racist. A Hispanic person is not born a racist. They don't understand that difference unless they're told that difference. That's proven. There went out the door a big argument against all that crap now there, didn't it? Yep. Oopsie. So, now that you know that we are in actuality, and have been in actuality for 4 years, in a very deep recession, some real economists who look at the real numbers will tell you that it's probably a depression and it's an inflationary recession or inflationary depression by the real numbers. And we know it's a direct result of the policies that propaganda would have you believe are the policies of the person who propaganda would tell you is your friend, even though facts tell you he is in fact a racist. Joe Biden has been all his life. The propaganda says he's your friend. And we know that the guy that you're being told is the racist actually could do things for you or for the country that would better your life, regardless of whether or not he is or not, but he isn't. We know that. What are you going to do? What would you do? Let's use some common sense here. How many households and families did the Mexican beer sickness and the following inflationary recession/depression destroy? How much damage has that done, not just on an economic level, but on a social level, down to the family? Think about it. Here's something that's never talked about in the media again. And this one actually cost me a business. Keystone Pipeline. This all started with the Keystone Pipeline. I actually closed down a business because of the Keystone Pipeline. Why? Let's go back to widgets, right? So, we have to grow, mine, or go to the forest and cut down everything we use to make widgets, right? Everything. Yes, plastic, we mine for it because it's a petroleum product and we have to pull that out of the ground. That's a type of mining. So every widget, everything we use is grown, forested, or mined. Okay? Well, we got to use chainsaws, tractors, mine trucks, conveyor belts, which are powered by electricity, which is generated either through hydro, mostly through coal or gas or nuclear, right? Which is mined. So everything runs on oil. Once it's pulled out of the ground, it's got to be taken to the factory by an airplane, by train, by ship, by a truck. Sometimes a combination of all three or four, right? That runs on diesel. Those machines are lubricated by oil. After it leaves the factory, the factory uses energy that's either mined or somehow or another pulled out of the earth, right? A good portion of it oil or coal or natural gas, or the lubricants for the machines in the factory are oiled, right? Then it's put on a truck, an airplane, a ship, or a train, and sent to a warehouse where it's stored. Then it's put on another truck, airplane, whatever, right? to the end user, right? I've been in either mining or logistics for 8 of the 10 years I've been out of the military. I've been in mining or logistics for 10 of the 12 years I've been out of the military. Some shape or form. I was in the logistics business. I was going to go independent. Stepped back and became an independent contractor in a different way. But because of Keystone Pipeline, which is oil, once that was closed off, and a lot of other oil-friendly policies were stopped, the price of oil derivatives, diesel, gasoline, motor oil, plastic, gear oil, went up by a factor of 2. 100% increase or better. So part of the cost of housing, part of the cost of expensive cars, part of the cost of everything is because of that. Oh, sure, that didn't go down. You'd have to start seeing that until 6 or 7 months later. But that's probably about 30% of it right there. The other part of it was the overproduction of money. We've got too many dollars chasing too few things, and because it's costing businesses who are also customers too, at any level of production, more to operate, because inflation hits them too, it's harder for them to meet their largest cost, which is labor. Meaning now, the increase of wages to keep up with the cost of doing business is almost impossible for those businesses to keep up with and stay in business. So what they have to do is they have to let some people go, increase the price of labor to those that they can hang on to, but at less than the rate of inflation for that business to remain solvent. And even still, some of them are still struggling. Thank you, Joe Biden. Let's go downtown, big city, and see how many small businesses that 5 years ago were there are now empty and boarded up, and weeds are growing in the parking lot. In Joe Biden's America, let's go to a small town in the South, the Midwest, or in the Mountain West, away from the large cities. And other than maybe a large grain elevator, large farming operations, and the hospital in town, and maybe Walmart if it's there or 20 miles away, how many of those towns are almost all of the businesses boarded up now and empty and closed? One of the features of the 1930s culture was Al Capone, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde. Why? And not just because of Prohibition, because Prohibition ended in 1933. The Depression lasted all the way up until 1941. And most of these figures happen either towards the end of Prohibition or after. Why? Bumpy Johnson, I think, got started in the 30s. I'm not sure. Maybe 40s. But why? Why? What happened there? What's going on today? But Joe Biden loves black people, and Joe Biden loves Hispanic people. Joe Biden's for the Native American. Well, okay, great. But he sure as hell ain't helping them. Should I drive down to the south side of Albuquerque here in the war zone and show you just how good Joe Biden's policies are working for those people? How about the south side of Chicago? Detroit? New Orleans? Oakland? Atlanta? Atlanta, just like here in Albuquerque, used to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. 2006, Albuquerque, New Mexico was rated by Newsweek magazine and U.S. News and World Report and Forbes, all three of them rated Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2006 as the #1 metropolitan area to move to in 2006. Now, depending on what numbers you're looking at, it's 1, 2, or 3 in murder, property crime, and violent crime. Blue city. In a blue state. Back then, it was a red state and a red city. In a blue country. Gotta love you some Democrats, right? It's kind of like the whole Margaret Sanger paradigm, right? All you got to do is read her letter to that doctor in 1939, and it shows you everything that they intend to do to black people, to poor white people, to Jewish people, to Hispanic people, to Native American people. She fucking says it. She calls, in that letter, she calls it the Negro Project, but you stand it up next to all of her other writings at the time, and you realize what she planned, they're actually fucking doing right now. So even if, which we know is not true, Donald Trump was a racist, you know what? At least under him, all those people had a chance at doing better. A better chance. All those people can still do better, but now they got to work harder at it. And fewer of them are going to succeed because they've got too many obstacles in the way. Because not everybody has the same toughness. That's just the way human beings are. Okay? But wouldn't it be better for a greater amount of the varying degrees of toughness amongst human beings to have a greater chance of excelling? And there's one generation at large that bought into this and has been buying into this since the 1960s. Boomers. And a lot of millennials too. But hey, we can't really be surprised on that one, even though Gen X was largely boomer kids. And we did play the boomer game for a little while, but we woke the fuck up. And the reason why is because once it started blowing up in our face, we remembered, when we were little, the greatest generation, even though they were old, and the older silent generation were still alive, and we remember enough of the lessons that they were still around to teach us, where with the millennials, by that point in time, those people were starting to die away, and there were fewer of them, or they had a lesser presence in their life. So, at least for us Gen Xers, we have a different point of reference. We played the boomer game. I did. A lot of us did. Until we were about 30, 35, 40, 50 years old. And somewhere in there, the wheels fucking came off on a lot of us. And then we're like, especially the Gen X men, we're like, oh, wait a minute, Grandpa said. Oh, well, then World War II folks were racist. No, they weren't. And I've gone into the history of all that because most of the World War II people actually, and the older silent generation people, actually were the ones who broke Jim Crow. Both white and minorities, because of their experiences during the Great Depression and during World War II. Well, things were still all segregated, but they were exposed enough to where they could see that, you know what, everybody was equal. And within 20 years after World War II, civil rights was almost completed until it was reversed in 1965. My grandpa had health problems, so he wasn't able to participate in the war. He was strong and healthy. He was a tough-ass old man. But at the time, because he was involved in a cotton gin accident and tore him, he's missing some, or he wound up missing some of his intestines, that disqualified him from military service. But he still served because he left the farm and he went and built airplane engines in Oklahoma City throughout the war, and he worked the factory floor right next to women, right next to black people, right next to Native American people in Oklahoma. And as he would tell it, boy, them darkies are just as good at turning a wrench and just as kind and just as wonderful as everybody else. His words, I quote. What was he saying? For when he was working in that cotton gin, when he fell in that cotton gin and it ripped up his guts, well, a darky saved me. He wasn't being a racist. That just was the term they used back then. So when it came time for him to be my grandpa, why was he telling me these things? He was trying to tell me that he learned through his life experience that darkies, black people, were the same as him. When he was on that factory floor, when he was working in that cotton gin, when he was out in those fields. Because, oh, by the way, as a sharecropper, and then eventually his family did start buying land and ranches and stuff like that, guess who a lot of those cowboys were working with him as a child, as a young man? Black people and Native Americans on the horse right next to him, running the 20 mule team right next to him. That was the World War II generation. That was the generation, along with the older silent generation people, that broke Jim Crow and gave us, up until 1965, civil rights. That's the facts. That's a lot of the learning that I got as a Gen Xer. Not from a boomer. From an old World War II guy. That's the man who taught me how to build barns when I was a teenager. That's the man who taught me how to fix a car. That's the man who had me operating farm equipment before I was 10 years old. That's also the man that sat there and told me his life stories about how all these different types of people were working shoulder to shoulder with him, and he became their friends. That's one of the reasons why us Gen X people are different. That's one of the reasons why us Gen X men, in particular, realize that all of this new race grievance, social grievance, Me Too stuff is exactly crap. Because our grandparents taught us better. Angry Man talks about his grandmother. He showed us a picture of his grandmother and him when he was a young boy. She was a beautiful woman. He talks about how she taught him. She taught him the exact same lessons my grandfather taught me. Ain't that funny that a black man raised by his grandmother and a white man taught by his grandfather, a white grandfather and a black grandmother from the same generation, taught a white guy and a black guy exactly the same lessons about life and about other people. About work, about economics. And until we pulled our heads out of our asses and realized that the boomer way wasn't the way to go, that their way was the way to go, that's when it all clicked. That's the difference in Gen X. That's why Gen Xers are so grumpy right now. That's why Gen Xers are the loudest voices for reason right now. It doesn't matter if they're a white Gen X man, or a black Gen X man, or a Hispanic Gen X man, or a Native American Gen X man, or a Jewish Gen X man. We're all thinking, for the most part, pretty much the same goddamn thing. And we're looking around at all this, and we're saying, this is a bunch of bullshit. And then we're looking around at each other and going, my grandpa taught me this. Oh yeah, well, my grandma taught me the same thing. Yeah, well, my abuelita or my abuelito said the same things to me. Oh shit. And they were all friends working in a factory or at war together back in the 40s and 50s. And they stood up for each other when somebody's rights or somebody's, Because you look at those civil rights marches, and that wasn't all black people, that was white people marching with them too. Everybody was getting involved. Yeah, I know. It was against a bunch of white racists. But you look at the generations of people that were in those marches, and white and black, some Hispanic and others, were arm in an arm, standing up for what was right, because they knew better. And that's the lessons we were taught. So I'm going to ask you again. The man who says he's your friend, but is a wolf in sheep's clothing, or the man who's a border collie who's going to lead you to water, to food, and to the barn? Which one? This is AL-BINO signing out. Y'all have a blessed day.